All right, hi everyone. This is Dan Barry from the Climate Program Office in Silver Spring, Maryland, and thanks for joining this webinar on the Unified Modeling Task Force and the report that they recently produced. So we have a really nice webinar today. We have one of the co-chairs of the task force, Jason Link, who's going to present on the contents of the report that they produced. And we're joined by a number of participants in the task force who are going to serve as panelists and can answer questions and whatnot after the talk is over. So I just want to give a little introduction to orient everyone to the report. You know, at NOAA, we do a lot of different types of modeling. It means many things here. I think most folks, know about the weather and climate and Earth system modeling mission element of NOAA, but the portfolio of modeling activities is really immense. We have groups that model air quality, marine ecosystems, coastal inundation, fisheries economics, waves, carbon, rivers, and many other systems. And the idea behind this task force, in part, is that to function effectively, we want to make sure that that diverse portfolio is well organized and planned, and that there's good coordination. So what you're going to hear about today is a recent effort to look across the portfolio and understand ways in which the disparate modeling efforts I listed before can be unified. So I'm a member of the Modeling Analysis, Predictions, and Projections program, and we're hosting this webinar on behalf of the task force. It's part of our webinar series. This is the 6th year of our webinar series, and actually in this year we've had 2 or 3 webinars on unified modeling focused on the weather-climate timescale and also different drivers of water modeling at the agency. So I already mentioned marine ecosystems, but there's also flooding and droughts and different elements of the water cycle that we're interested in. I hope you'll check out the rest of the webinar series. We have a web page that has recordings and slides up for all 6 years of the webinar series, and there's a lot of topics like droughts, extremes, model development, many other subjects that you can hear about there. So today we're going to hear, as I mentioned, a presentation on the activities in the new report from Jason Link, who's on the line. Jason, are you there?
I sure am, Dan.
Okay, great. And as I mentioned, we also have a number of other members of the task force on the line, and they can serve as panelists and answer questions from the audience. And just a reminder that on WebEx, if you want to ask a question, what I recommend you do is to use the chat function. You can just send me a chat and say, I have a question. I'll unmute you, or you can actually type your question in if you'd like to have me ask the question of Jason or one of the other task force participants. And I think without further ado, we'll turn it over to Jason. So Jason, your slides are up. Everyone should be able to see them at this point, and feel free to go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Dan, and good morning, everyone. As Dan mentioned, I want to talk to you about the Unified Modeling Task Force and some of the efforts we've been doing on behalf of all, really, as Dan noted, modeling within NOAA. Before I do that, let me acknowledge the list of task force members. You can see them listed there. Not everyone of the task force is able to join us this morning, but several have. At the end of the talk, we'll open it up and let them weigh in and have a little bit of a panel discussion. So if you have really easy and great questions like that, I'm happy to take those. If they're very hard and detailed or very difficult, I'll make sure the panel handles those questions. So, and since you're all on mute, I just presume you're laughing at that lame joke.
We're chuckling. Don't worry. It was a good joke.
All right. The other thing I want to emphasize is if you can see where I'm moving my cursor, the link to the report that we just released is right here. It was also included in the announcement as part of the WebEx materials. But we encourage you to take a look at that and dig a little deeper and look at some of the details. I believe our former chief scientist and current head of the Research Council called this a very dense report but very readable. So I just acknowledge all of our task force members for providing such excellent content and also making it very readable. So thank you to them. So without further ado, let me jump in and tell you a little bit about why we were doing this and then unpack this report for you and then give you a sense of where we're headed in the coming months and years. So the next slide really is why are we doing unified modeling, what is it, and it's really the most effective way to number a set of tasks, or using an effective number of models for a set of tasks. What we want to be very clear, very, very aware of the sensitivities to this. So what this does not mean is that we have one model to model them all. We don't have one model that rules everything. We're not looking at just a single model, even within some of the applications that Dan mentioned, be it climate, ecosystems, coastal inundation, whatever. We're not looking for just that one type of model. We're looking for a system of models that are most effective, most efficient, that really tackle the mission needs that we at NOAA have. So that's what we're talking about. Not one model, but a modeling system that is most effective for the set of tasks that we have to do. There's a lot of details about this unpacked further in the report, but we want to make sure, again, I can't reiterate it enough, we're not implying one model. So for the person who logs on 5 or 10 minutes late and misses that, make sure that we remind them of that at the end if they're missing that point. So the next slide, why does NOAA need a unified modeling approach? And really the Research Council recognized that we were missing across line office, all the different organizations and even subparts of the different lines, a way to get together, discuss modeling issues, best practices. Hey, how are you all handling the challenge of data assimilation? Hey, how are you guys handling whatever the issue might be? And there was a pretty clear sense that in the few times where we've done that in various meetings, it was incredibly valuable. And we've had some Weather Service and OAR and NIMS, NOS and NIMS, NESDIS and so on. We've had a couple, smaller focused workshops or working group meetings, and the categorical response was very positive from those. So we said we really need to move forward with that. And then from that, the Research Council stood up this task force to identify what those topics are, come up with an approach of how we might address them, get some strategic actions we can do as an agency to move forward to really advance unified modeling. So why does NOAA need a unified modeling approach? And it's really, sorry to sound a bit like Dilbert here, but we're trying to get a business model where modeling costs are minimized. And I think we were thinking along these lines before the change in administration, but just that effectiveness and that efficiency identified here in that first bullet point is something that we need to do as good stewards of taxpayer trust in our efforts. And I think the other thing is we want to facilitate critical mass for model development. And in some instances, it's disparate. In some instances, it's packaged in certain pockets. And we wanted to really make sure that we weren't missing something that is so disciplinary isolated or so focused in a particular application that could have broader applications, that we didn't lose that opportunity. And I think the third reason we're trying to do this is it leverages the efforts of the modeling community and really tries to reduce some of the, if you will, overhead and those associated costs for NOAA and its customers. And again, it gets back to that efficiency of effort and focus of let's get the modeling community together and talking and coordinating and emphasizing the needs and shared challenges that we all have. So with that, here's the vision that the task force kind of put out and got buy-in from the NOAA Research Council, is that all of the models that NOAA does are interoperable and accessible. They optimally interface with observations. That's an important point. They're efficiently integrated into a prudent set of scalable systems that cross disciplinary boundaries and serve the full suite of mission-driven applications. Again, that's a mouthful, and it's hard to read and talk about, but the gist of this is really trying to make all of NOAA's modeling more effective, more efficient, better tied into what we need to collect and ensure that those OBS are being made or being tweaked so that we get those to validate models, et cetera, and really rethinking how we interact across the disciplines is a lot of the vision behind where we're headed with this. So let me get out of kind of why and what and jump into how we started tackling this. The timeline that we had was last year, almost a year ago now, the Research Council stood up this task force, and we began scoping out this strategy. We identified some themes and recommended actions, and I'll unpack those a little bit here in a few moments. The task force then submitted a draft of our first white paper to the council last fall. The council iterated with us a few times, approved it, and then we went and established some of the subgroups, which we'll talk about again in a moment, for some of the recommended actions, and we're now developing those into further internal papers for how to address them. And then we finalized the report, and we're trying to disseminate it more broadly, not only in print, but in meetings and at community events and so forth, and really how we can unpack some of these subgroups. We've been planning for a webinar, and here we are. We can perhaps repeat in broader context or other contexts as is appropriate. We just briefed the Research Council a week or two ago on some of the draft documents, and our plan is to deliver all those final papers that grew out of the report, the white paper report on what unified modeling is. We have 5 white papers that we're going to deliver here in about a month or so. And then from that, and you'll see this mentioned in a moment, we're going to transition to a permanent unified modeling committee as part of the Research Council to ensure that those efforts continue, to ensure that we continue to coordinate and provide venues to talk and escalate the need for unified modeling. So some of the tasks that we were given to the task force, I think that's pretty heavy on tasks, but anyways, a couple of the things we were asked to do was to develop an approach for the agency. That's the white paper. And then the strategy to do that is also the white paper, but more so that, and how we are going to guide the agency coming up with some recommendations for short-term and long-term actions. So those are finished. The strategy and the approach are kind of laid out. We've identified potential topics for further exploration. We'll talk about those here in a second, but those topics are being unpacked in these other groups and other subgroups. And then we really want to facilitate cross-line office collaboration amongst all the modelers within NOAA, and I would even say our partners outside of NOAA with other agencies or the academic community, wherever there are appropriate modeling partnerships to be had. So those are underway. Let me give you a quick overview of the white paper. What does unified modeling mean? We've kind of walked through that in real general terms here, but we unpack that a bit more. What's in it for NOAA? What's the business case for this? What are the elements of unified modeling? And that's where some of the definitional aspects of this topic really come out and come into play. Fascinating stuff to really tweak this, and I found it amazing that we had so many different disciplines from all the different line offices, and we came together and converged on all these terms with a lot less trouble than I thought we might have originally. And then number 4 are themes for unified modeling and data assimilation, and we emphasize several of those that we need to do. And then the last bit of this report are some of the actions that we recommend, and then those form the basis for some of the work that we're now ongoing in these sub-working groups. So let me give you these themes of modeling and data assimilation. I doubt most of you can read the table of contents on the right, and then we'll talk about the recommended actions that we're tackling as we speak. So the different themes that we emphasized was software, high-performance computing, data management, infrastructure. There's a lot there that we need to do. We need to do perhaps an enhanced or improved or maintain the already good jobs that we're doing on a lot of these issues, but making sure those interfaces are playing together nicely in the context of a lot of the advances coming out in the computing world. I think the second point is how do we deal with process modeling and numerical approaches. There's a whole set of details in there that if you're into those specifics, we talk about in the white paper. Again, very dense, very quick, but we understand that we had a limited space, so we're trying to explore how we could take some of those approaches, some of the research even of how to do modeling or what the model structure, functions, whatever forms could look like, and then plug that into the system. And then also, how do we take all that research that we're doing on all the modeling that we're coming into play and transfer that to operations, is in effect R2X or R2O, for those of you who remember those terms. How do we make this operational? And also, how do we take the operational needs and transfer those into research questions to make sure that they are addressing the needs that we have for the different missions? The fourth one here is communication and community engagement. If Anna Rita is on the line, I'll let her speak to that at the end, but we really are trying to emphasize a lot of the cross-disciplinary communication, the cross-community engagement, and there's a whole range of activities that we've got planned I'll mention here in a moment. But that, to us, seems trivial. It's not something that a lot of introverted science geeks gravitate towards, but we recognize the importance of making sure that the communications are clear and they're often. The cross-disciplinary coupling is also an important thing. How do we get, for instance, ROMS models speaking into ecosystems models? And there's a whole host of different things like that we could come into play, not so much to limit the different kinds of models and research and the modeling that goes on, but how do we take outputs from one discipline or even one line office and plug them into another so that it informs that modeling and the decisions that need to be made from that. The sixth item is we recognize we're not doing this in a vacuum and that people and the economy are critical. They drive our mission. How do we integrate those kinds of decisions into the discussion, make sure we're not missing those? And that hopefully is laid out in the details of the recommendations that we'll unpack here in a moment. And then we recognize that within NOAA, there's the governance issues and best practices for modeling. How do we handle that? Is there a place we can have discussions about that? How do we coordinate, et cetera, et cetera? So those were some of the key themes that we had identified in our unified modeling approach. From that, we came up with 6 recommendations. One is to establish a formal body. One is this information exchange. Another is adequate resources, defining best practices. The fifth one, which will probably be most contentious, is regular review of model redundancy and retention, and then making high-performance computing more accessible to all of NOAA. So let me emphasize that each one of these is actively being thought about and nailed down in these sub-working groups. We're not trying to solve these problems, but to come up with a plan to address each of these issues. So let me emphasize each one of these in one slide for each of the actions, and then we'll wrap up the talk shortly after that. So the first item is establish a formal body to coordinate modeling. This was a research council activity, not a task force decision, although we recommend it. And the research council agreed to stand up this body as a research council subcommittee. And the task force is going to transition to that permanent group in June. I would say if there's anyone on the call who's interested in being a part of that, contact me, contact the co-chair, contact any of the people that you see on the task force from your lines. Let us know. There's plenty of work we can find to ensure that we can engage you and your expertise. Katie Robinson is the person who's herding all of us cats, is excellent at that. So give her a call or an email if you're interested in that. And the reason we're trying to do this is just to coordinate a lot of our activities and accountability for achieving some of the multi-line office objectives. That's where we're headed with this. There was a lot of debate over what this would look like, what form and shape it would cover, how much authority that would entail. The decision was made that the authority still resides within the line offices, but the coordination needs to occur at that level across them. 5.2 was establish a NOAA-Wide process for information exchange. This was really trying to figure out how we can get everybody to talk together on a regular basis. Not only within NOAA, we would probably do that first at a big picture thing, but also with the broader modeling community. And you can see examples of what that might look like. And really we want to do this to enhance collaboration, improve communication. The thing I would mention is we are planning, put it on your calendars, sometime next year, a NOAA-Wide annual modeling fair. And we're trying to get that together so that we can all come in and talk about one of the themes that I just mentioned. How do you handle, say, data assimilation? How do you handle multi-model ensembles? How do you handle whatever the modeling challenges are, irrespective of the application or discipline? Let's get all the smart people in our organization together. Let's let them sip coffee or other beverages and just swap ideas and exchange information. That's kind of what we're trying to do at one level, is to create that venue, or really multiple venues for this to occur. 5.3 basically is we're trying to get more resources to do this, and that's really recognizing a couple of things. One is that it takes resources to do this work, but we're also emphasizing that this isn't just more of the same, it's the unified approach, and we're trying to emphasize how we would go about doing this in a way not of the usual more money, but more in the sense of the return on investment if we do this is probably going to be higher because of the built-in coordination and the expectation of unification and cross-cutting collaborations already built into the discussion. So this is still something we're working on. We have no idea what the budgetary environment is going to look like, but we're still going to keep pushing on this because we see this. We also get the sense that, hey, maybe we need to rearrange, rethink things, and that's why this group, particularly here, will report to that standing group to coordinate what are the top priorities for NOAA with respect to modeling across all the agencies. How can we better leverage existing work, maybe better coordinate that to meet some of those needs more effectively. So that's part of the discussion in this chapter as well. For 5.4, we want to define best practices in NOAA modeling and establishing a standard way of doing things. Now that doesn't mean we're going to come down and say everybody has to do things a certain way. What it's more saying is this lightweight approach to just check, hey, are you doing this? Have you considered that in a more general sense? And then specifically some of the best practices relative to modeling in general that we've identified in the white paper that we would talk about thematically in, say, our NOAA-Wide modeling meetings or workshops. How do we get those best practices nailed down? How do we share them with one another? How do we document them? How do we look at that process? Where do we put them? How do we reposit all of them? Where does that go? What does that look like? So this really is meant to be not a constraint, but really just, hey, there's some really excellent ideas that NESDIS is coming up with. Maybe Ocean Service or Fishery Service ought to look at those, and let's just make sure we're sharing that and maybe eventually codify that in a very lightweight, not a heavy, not a thou shalt, but a hey, you might consider type of an approach. So that's what we're developing with this chapter. A couple more slides and we're almost finished. We want to establish a review of model redundancy and retention. And the reason for this is a lot of the models are, in some instances, are becoming redundant or outdated. And how do we have a process to ensure that we can safely retire them, to ensure that that application is covered, to ensure that all users of the model or digesters of the model output have their needs met, and we step through that in an orderly fashion. And it really is trying to identify which aspects of these older models are valuable and need to be continued, this continuity aspect. It also provides information and, if you will, some form of standard for development of new models as well, and keeping that in place. So there's a lot of discussion on this. This is not going to come out and go through and nail down every model. This is more trying to set up, hey, if you're interested in this, here's a process you might utilize and some steps to do that, establishing kind of this rubric and set up protocols and review panels, who and how you might go about that. So again, this is process emphasized in this perspective. The last recommendation and sub-working group we have unpacking it is making high-performance computing more accessible. And this really is trying to facilitate the wider use of HPC and aligning HPC within NOAA priorities. There's a lot of ongoing efforts on this topic already. We actually tapped into that community, have some ex officio members on this group, and really we're just trying to foster this collaborative integrative modeling to utilize the amazing high-speed computers, high-performance computers that we have, and make that more accessible in terms of user interfaces, availability, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the 5 or 6 recommendations, what we're trying to do to unpack them. Let me summarize and tell you what we're planning to do. We want to recommend or finalize these recommendations here in the next month or so and get that back to the Research Council. The task force is going to transition to a permanent group in June, and most of the task force members are going to stay on. We're also looking at some of these subgroups to stand up committees to tackle some of these issues. So again, if you're interested, if you see an opportunity for sharing your wisdom or knowledge, or if you want a professional development chance, we welcome that. And then the last thing is as I just said, not only on the task force, but in general, we're going to need everyone's help implementing this, whatever's relevant for you and your modeling efforts or the programs that you're talking to. We need your help spreading the word. We need your help thinking about these things as you go about your modeling. And again, I'm not talking day-to-day hitting the run button or sending the command prompt. I'm talking stepping back, thinking about, hey, are there things that I could do to tap into other parts of the organization that might be more effective for meeting my job and maybe actually help someone else out? And then the other thing we'd like to ask your help on is just spread the word. If you think this is a good idea, which I hope so, let other people know about it, pass it along the report. If you need any one of the task force members or subgroups thereof to come and talk to you or to fill you in to your particular group or program, I offer that on behalf of them. They're an excellent group of people, really passionate about this, and I'm sure they're all happy to be able to do that. So with that, we're going to stop. We're going to see if there's any questions first, and then we're going to go all the way back up. Close your eyes while I scroll this back up. we're going to go back up and see if there's any task force members who want to weigh in. And let me hand it back to you, Dan, see if there's any questions. While we're waiting on that, I'll ask the task force members to get ready. When you're done, Dan, we'll have everybody who's on the line introduce themselves from the task force. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Great. Thanks a lot, Jason. That was a really nice overview of the task force and the report. And I want to mention you have the link on your first slide here to the report. Folks can also get it through the email that I sent out. If you received the invitation to this, there's an FTP link in that email where you can download the report. So to ask questions again on this webinar, if you're logged in virtually, please send me a chat message. Let me know you have a question. You can just say, I have a question. I'll unmute your line. Or you can type the question out, and I'm happy to pose it for you. But while we're waiting for questions to come in, like Jason said, I do want to just go down the list of the participants in the task force that we have on the line and in the room and give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. So I think first up on my list here is Ed Myers. Ed, are you on the line?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Ed. Go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Okay, so I'm the branch chief of the Coastal Marine Modeling Branch, which is located in the Office of Coast Survey within NOS. And so our branch works on various hydrodynamic modeling projects and transferring them to operations.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Eric Baylor. Eric, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm Eric Baylor. I work in NESDIS Center for Satellite Applications and Research, focusing on getting satellite data assimilated into numerical models. And I'm also helping lead the cross-NOAA development of the West Coast Operational Forecast System, which is a regional model for our West Coast. So working to unify those various flavors of things.
Great, thank you. Let's see, next up is John Dunn. John, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I lead Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratories, Biogeochemistry and Ecosystems Group.
Thanks, John. Next up is Rick Musso. Rick, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you. Yes, I'm Rick Musso, and I work in NOAA Fisheries. My expertise is in the modeling of the population dynamics of harvested fish stocks in order to provide management advice.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Scott Cross.
Hi, yeah, this is Scott Cross from NESDIS. I'm a NOAA data center guy, and with a long-standing interest in environmental modeling and dealing with the considerable data and data management challenges that arise therefrom.
Great, thanks, Scott. And then Tim Schneider.
Yeah, hi everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm on the computer microphone. Tim Schneider, I'm with the National Weather Service Office of Science and Technology Integration and the Model Program Division. So we manage all the programs that fund a lot of the model development in the Weather Service, and many of you know we're spinning up a whole new next generation global prediction system at NCEP, and we're really interested in taking a community approach. We just had a big workshop last week, which I've been pointed out we might, in this era of unified modeling, do a better job advertising those sorts of activities in the future. We have the strategic implementation plan we're doing, and we have a bunch of working groups there. That's a good opportunity to cross-pollinate with unified modeling. So if folks are interested, let me know, or Hendrik Tolman, our fearless co-chair, or other Weather Service reps.
Great, thanks, Tim. Jesse Carmen?
Yeah, I'm Jessie Carmen. I'm in the Office of Weather and Air Quality, and I'm NOAA's representative for the National System Prediction Capability, which is an interagency partnership for coordinating modeling efforts and improving a capability across agencies, given that some of these modeling missions do appear in various parts of different agencies, and there's a recognition that we need to be pulling together on this.
Great, thanks. And then last but not least, you do have to herd all the cats, so definitely acknowledge it.
Hi, this is Katie Robinson. I'm in OAR's Office of Policy Planning and Evaluation, and as previously mentioned, I do a lot of project management for cross-NOAA entities and activities.
Great. Okay. Thanks for all the intros. I mean, you can see I think it's a very broad committee, really pulling from all the different elements of NOAA. So I think it's really nicely balanced, and I think the report's great. You guys have done a nice job. I haven't gotten any questions yet on the chat function on WebEx. I don't know if anyone in the room has a question for any of the participants in the task force. Anything you'd like to ask? Heather has a question.
I started to have a question that I think is for Tim, I think is the person that I'd like to ask. But so Tim, you mentioned the community modeling meeting last week, and I don't remember, please correct me if I'm wrong, I don't remember too much about how the SIP effort fits into this unified modeling task force effort across NOAA. So I'd just be interested, I guess, in hearing about how you're making sure that it is, connecting and not orthogonal, and kind of reinforces what this broader group is doing.
Yeah, that's a good question, Heather. So there's actually, just sort of from a weather and, sort of medium range out to subseasonal to seasonal forecasting on the weather side, there's a whole kind of, it's like a layered, like stacked like a wedding cake with all these different layers of planning that's happening. At the very top is this effort, the unified modeling effort that Jason just described so well. And that's very high level and looking to cross all of NOAA. As you drill down on the weather side, we have within the Office of Science and Technology Integration, Hendrik Komen's pulling together sort of a long-term strategic roadmap on that. And then as you drill further down, you have the SIP, the Strategic Implementation Plan, which is really aimed at sort of the near term. What do we need to do for the next few years to actually implement the Next Generation Global Prediction System, which we have a deadline set by Dr. Sullivan and company. We have a deadline to actually implement this new model by FY19. So really the SIP is kind of almost tactical. How do we get from here to there? Hendrik's broader strategic planning effort, which takes us out 5 to 10 years, and then this effort, which is looking across NOAA. So we have pretty good cross-membership through that planning channel. A lot of what I described is really aimed at the weather and sort of short-term climate, if you will. And so we're getting that cross-pollination there, and it is an Earth system modeling effort as we start talking about weeks 3, 4, and subseasonal to seasonal forecasting. Then we start talking about coupling in oceans and land processes. That brings a little more of the unified modeling approach to it, but mostly it's being coordinated through cross-membership, and I think if anybody has suggestions of how we can better engage beyond that, we're all ears. I think some of it lies in what Jason had described that we put in the plan. But Heather, I've been a little long-winded. Apologies. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I was thinking actually, especially since governance was mentioned here, and I know that's an issue for the Weather Service specifically, how much you may be benefiting from what the work this group has done. But yeah, I think you answered it, that it's you're kind of moving towards, right now it's the members that are providing insights on both, and there's information being exchanged that way, and you're looking for more maybe specific ways to coordinate.
Yeah, there's the SIP actually has 14 working groups which span governance, infrastructure, system architecture. Given that there's a tremendous number of resources going into it, it's kind of an 800-pound gorilla. So it's probably really important to, in the broader NOAA context, have this dialogue now, because we're, as we in the Weather Service and OAR invest heavily in that side of it, that's going to set us down a path that's going to be hard to undo. So the timing is timely.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, Tim. And there was a question from Ting Lei that was, I think, sort of along those lines. So, Ting, if you have a follow-up, let me know, but I think Tim largely, answered what your question was as well. There was another question from Rich Bell, and Rich is pointing out that, the Weather Service uses a lot of multi-model approaches to prediction on various timescales, and Rich was wondering whether there are thoughts of, doing that type of an approach to modeling in some of the other applications that the report talks about. So I don't know, Jason or others from outside of the Weather Service, if you want to comment on that particular question.
I can take a stab and then pass it off to, Ed or Rick or others, but you were cutting out, Dan, when you were reading Rich's question. I'm sorry. Would you mind repeating it?
So Rich is basically wondering whether some of the other, applied modeling efforts utilize or plan to utilize ensemble approaches in the way that the Weather Service uses those types of approaches. So like, in the weather prediction or NMME, there are ensemble forecast approaches, and whether that's something that, in fisheries or the Ocean Service or elsewhere in different applications that maybe folks have been thinking about that as well.
The short answer, Rich, is yes, absolutely. Now you're going to want the details, and there's a lot of debate, a lot of discussion of how to do that. Let me kick it to, for example, to Rick, who gives some sense of the thinking going on in the stock assessment world, and then Ed or others, I don't know, Scott, if you want to tackle it from other lines, go ahead. But Rick?
Am I unmuted?
We hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so ensemble modeling is relatively new in the fisheries world. We work in this regulatory environment, so that coming up with one number has always been a prime directive, and we're finding that that is really causing us to undercut the degree to which we can really represent the uncertainty in the advice that we're providing. And so we're rapidly making a variety of inroads into various ways of looking at ensemble model development in order to help us move forward. And in doing that, trying to reach out to some of the other disciplines that have already moved well along in this direction.
Does anyone else care to respond? Ed, anybody else?
And this is Ed, and within our office, we are also looking at some ensemble approaches. For example, with some storm surge modeling systems that we have in place, and so one key part of that is the high performance computing resources needed to run those systems. So I think this Unified Modeling Task Force, being able to address the high performance needs for things like that will play a very positive role in the future of those systems.
Great, thanks, Ed. I don't see any other questions online. I wanted to mention, Jason, that Anna Rita wasn't able to call in. It's a little late for her. She's in China, so she has a 12-hour time difference. But having spent a few thousand hours with her over the last few years, because we're in the same program, I think I can maybe take a crack at what you would probably say in terms of community engagement. I think, we feel like it's really important to document the models in a very clear way so that they're accessible to the external community. That's something I think we hear over and over that's an impediment to really interacting with the modeling centers and other groups at NOAA. So really, giving them documentation, making the code available, thinking of ways to share the code. People can check the code out and work with it, outside of the trunk of internal development and be able to provide that, those edits back in a testable way. That's really important. Data sharing, so, if we run tests internally of these models to really make some of the data sets and the tests available to the community so they can evaluate them. Jason, you listed high-performance computing. I think as an extension of that, something we've tried to do in CPO is to secure time on the Gaia system for people who are outside of NOAA, so academic researchers and with all the challenges we have with HPC internally, those are magnified even more when we try to get somebody who doesn't have a NOAA security clearance or an existing relationship outside of a grant onto the computer. And I think some of these problems that people are working on externally with us are very data intensive and computationally intensive, and so there's sort of an obligation on the agency to help these folks get HPC because they probably can't do it locally at whatever university they sit at. And then the grant and program functions, so programs like CPO or other programs, I think that's an important way to engage the community. Structured calls that you can bring internal investigators together with external people to collaborate. That's something, at least in our office, that works well, and there are many other programs that do this successfully as well, like Sea Grant and other programs throughout the agency. So those are some things I think Anna Rita would probably mention in that area, and I'll just kind of wanted to plug for some of those things in her absence.
Thank you, Dan.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds good, and she's really big on that engagement part, so that's why I called it out. But you've tackled some of the things there. I believe the chapter she's leading is 5.2. When we get ready for that internal to know, a lot of those details are going to be unpacked, and we welcome everyone to take a look at that. So thank you.
That sounds good. So it sounds like my mind meld with Anna Rita has been successful, since I could predict what she would write in that chapter. So I don't see any other questions online. I guess I wanted to ask one question, Jason or others. You listed some next steps, standing up the permanent group out of this task force that'll keep looking at these issues and finalizing the recommendations, things like that. What do you think the next steps are? Like, are there low-hanging fruit? Are there topics that really do engage across the line offices and the different modeling efforts that you think everyone can roll their sleeves up and really tackle in a detailed way? Do you guys have some ideas of what those might be, what you're looking forward to jumping into, at a really kind of focused level?
Yes, but let me just open it up to the panel first, and then I can synthesize at the end. In several of the draft chapters, we actually have a table, in a couple of them anyways, that says, hey, here's some things we can do in the short term, and it doesn't really cost a whole lot of resources, if any. We should do that, and there's a list of those. I don't want to single out any one, but there's a lot of those types of things. But let me open it up to the task force members on the panel if they want to emphasize any.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering in particular with the panel, folks kind of maybe outside of the Weather Service architecture or, OAR architecture, to you, what are some of the things that you think you could kind of reach out and that we can come together on to start tackling with this effort? So, Scott or Chris, Ed, Rick. Eric.
Well, this is Rick. Let me make a quick.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Rick. I was just going to add that, some of the things that we could do is try to tap into, some of the well-developed practices that you see in the Weather Service and elsewhere on the development of a very professional approach to model building. And I think, tapping into, the kind of thinking that's gone into unified modeling within the weather community is something that can give us a good example of, how we can move forward. Because, each line office, each program is really at a different stage of evolution on this. We all recognize that. And trying to, get some information about, but just where can we go is one of the first steps that I think help us move in those good directions.
Right. So you can maybe identify best practices and try to transport those across the line offices.
You got it.
One of the things that we need to be, this is Eric Baylor speaking, need to be thinking in terms of enterprise kinds of capacities and capabilities that allow us to unify with, that are in conjunction with modeling, but may not necessarily be modeling itself, such as dissemination portals, formats for data and input and output, and those kinds of flavors of things as well.
This is Tim. I know you were kind of looking outside the Weather Service kind of perspective, so I'm going to try to take my Weather Service hat off. And I think one of the barriers we see to bringing other lines into the fold, and sometimes we talk about haves and have-nots. There's the folks who've been around a long time in the HPC game and have a lot. So we're looking at ways to sort of lower the barriers to get colleagues from the other lines at the table. And one of the concepts, and we're still kind of debating internally what to call it, but one of the concepts we've come up with is this notion of a sandbox, where we create means to share knowledge and experience, and so on and so forth. And I think the other concept that I've been kind of stewing on a little bit in my own mind and is, we work in diverse ways. Not everything is on a supercomputer, and yet many things might need what comes from a supercomputer. So what kind of infrastructure can we build that allows us to talk and share data, share code, share analysis tools, and so on and so forth. So that's been one way I think we're trying to break some of this down and bridge.
Yeah, I was thinking, Jason, I really like the idea of having this fair at some point to try to bring all these communities together, and I think that'll be kind of a microcosm of this challenge that Tim's talking about, just figuring out in a meeting context how to get that collaboration and coordination between these groups, and crossing language barriers even in terms of how these communities work and what, for example, assimilation means to the Weather Service versus fisheries or versus an economics application. I think that'll be a really interesting challenge in microcosm just to set up this fair that you're thinking of. So that'll be really interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. That's exactly our we've identified that challenge, but we also see that as an opportunity. I think, some of the engagement bits also are low-hanging fruit that we can do along the next, 9 to 12 months up to that fair, the modeling fair, and a lot of that's just continuing the dialogue, continuing the coordination, continuing to develop some of these themes. So we're hoping that by the time we reach that fair, we've had a few more events like the one we're having now to perhaps lower some of those barriers more broadly. So I don't know if that's helpful, but we're intending to really get the community to coalesce around certain themes and swap best practices across line offices.
Yeah. There was one more question also from Rich Bell, and he was wondering if the models that are, simulating time series, as far as I understand this question, if the models that are simulating time series data have problems with the retrospectives. I think what he means by this is, when you do, when you develop a new model, I'm familiar with the Weather Service, you'll do a retrospective forecast or go back in time to see how the model performs. And I think what he's wondering is how that's been approached in other communities outside of fisheries in terms of navigating the retrospective element, and if there's lessons learned for the task force. Anyone want to tackle that one?
But I think that question, Rich and Dan, highlights what you just flagged of different terminology and linguistics, but it's a more generic validation and vetting problem. And I think that's where we come into play in some of those best practices, building on what was it, Rick, the VVUQ report a couple of years ago. There are some things that we can learn and swap that I think in this case might be from the fisheries world sharing to other lines, but it might be that the reason we're hearing a little radio silence is we're just using different terminology.
Yeah.
Yeah, my thoughts exactly, Jason. What in one community is initial condition kind of problems, in other communities might be a similar problem described elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is Scott Cross, and I would just say when I hear models and time series, I envision large data sets of the kind that we try to deal with but don't do a very good job of so far. And so I guess I feel like we know what to do. This is an area where, we kind of know what to do, but we simply don't have the resources to store and make available, large, multi-year, multi-decade data sets in many cases.
Okay, thanks, Scott, and everyone for responding to that question. So I don't see any other questions coming in. Jason, do you have any other final comments you wanted to make before we kind of close up shop here?
Sure. I just want to thank, first of all, the task force, those of you on the call. This is a great group to work with. Everybody's really into the modeling and really roll their sleeves up, get her done. So that's excellent. I want to thank everyone on the webinar who's taking the time to sit in and listen to this. Hopefully this has piqued your interest. Hopefully you can help contribute and help us implement this, and I thank you for your time. Thank you, Dan, for hosting. And as always, I always do this before I wrap up any call. I check in with Katie to make sure I haven't missed anything. Katie?
Nope, you've covered it all, Jason.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you, Dan.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Jason. I'll echo all your thanks to everyone who attended and all of the participants in the task force for being here, answering questions. We've recorded this task force. The recording will be posted on the webinar website along with Jason's slides, so you can check that out. Probably in the next couple of days we'll have that up. And I really appreciate everyone participating. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.